Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. Time for another show, but it's time for, we are without Greg Dworkin this morning. So I'll change the phrasing of it and say it's time for another show, but it's time also for Greg to continue to convalesce. Everything's okay. Everything's fine. Just a little bug and a little bit of laryngitis, I guess, that went with it. In fact, he called just before the show went on to let me know. I just wanted you to hear what I sound like. So he's almost back, but you can definitely hear the strain. And I don't think that voice is going to hold out an hour without causing more trouble down the road. So, okay, we'll give it a shot again tomorrow. He did, of course, compile the abbreviated and appreciated pundit roundup. How about that? That's a new one. We'll do that one on the weekends. The appreciated pundit roundup. That is interesting, and there's two senses in which that might work. One, we appreciate punditry. Well, that one probably doesn't work very well for us. Sometimes we do, I guess. We need it for everything we do on the show, so I guess we should appreciate it. And the other would be, after having abbreviated it all weekend, don't worry, because we were investing it for you, and it has now appreciated in value, and we are going to bring you the full value appreciated pundit roundup on the weekends, except we're not going to do that, so it's just a nice thought. That's all. And, gee whiz. Oh, you know what? He's sending me his raft stories, or at least some of them anyway, so that, we can still fill the hour. And we will endeavor to do that. Justice Putnam also, in giving us the thumbs up, letting us know what's on his mind this morning. This is an interesting way of looking at it as a preview, 2 hours early preview of the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which follows us here on Netroots Radio. And we try to give you a preview of what they're doing in the last seconds of the show, when we usually flub it horribly. But let's see. This is always hints about stories that are on his mind. Let's see. A few stare downs in the courtroom yesterday. Yes, I understand that was the case. I didn't get to watch any of the coverage, but rather unspectacular as I understand it. And of course, I missed it if there was a revolution last night, if the MAGA troops overthrew the deep state after all. But as I understand it, the protesters outside the Miami courthouse were outnumbered by the press there to cover anybody who might show up to protest. So your typical midweek afternoon protest situation. People just aren't very interested in it, and people just aren't all that interested in expending energy to come out and support Trump. They go to rallies, I understand that, but there's a whole show going on there, and they buy merchandise and they hang out with one another, and who knows what the attraction is in going to one of these things. But hanging out outside the courthouse, by the way, a good number of people who might otherwise, I think, be inclined to stand outside some venue or another and voice their support for Trump during some Trump crisis, would probably choose not to stand outside the federal courthouse in Miami or anywhere else because, a good number of them probably have warrants out for their arrest or might be identified on camera and matched to January 6th footage or whatever. So it was a bit of a bust for them. Let's see. He also mentions that Trump thinks because he sold top secret nuke docs to the Saudis, every president does. That probably is the case. And he must have said so yesterday. He gave a closed circuit television, basically online TV speech following his arraignment yesterday. And you know what? I didn't really give a damn about that one either. And it's been good to see that there's not a great deal of coverage being given to it. It was televised, and I did notice that there was a battle of chyrons across the various networks, and that Fox actually went with something like when Biden spoke? Did Biden give some comments of some kind? I thought he was going to avoid commenting on the situation, and maybe he was just commenting on something else. But I saw circulated screenshots of Fox News allegedly putting up the chyron of wannabe dictator speaks at the White House. And I mean, I don't even know if they were speaking to the Trump situation or not. I didn't even check. I don't care. But that was really something to label the current president of the United States wannabe dictator because some other portion of the executive branch was actually arresting someone under the Espionage Act, which is kind of the way it's supposed to work. You're not supposed to be giving away all these funky secrets to everyone. All right, let's see. I'll get to Greg's mini raft of stories. Plus, of course, there's the abbreviated pundit roundup, which will give us a pretty good idea of what's been happening and probably tell me a little bit about what went on yesterday afternoon. It just was impossible for me to find the will to watch these things. I happen to notice this is a good opportunity to discuss a little bit of procedure with you, just in checking the bird site, as I sometimes do when I say, I know news has happened, but there's just not that much discussion of it in my Mastodon feed. That's my own fault for not broadening the feed, but how much time can you, really devote to trying to recreate your old Twitter feed? Anyway, happened to stop by and see this tweet from longtime Netroots denizen Hillzoy, who complains rightly about Tommy Tuberville's blanket hold, as reported by Defense News via Twitter. His blanket hold on military confirmations, that would be rank advancement for top officers in the military, are subject to Senate advice and consent, essentially, just like every other executive branch job. But let's see. His blanket hold on military confirmations could create as many as 5 Joint Chiefs vacancies. And how many Joint Chiefs are there? Probably not many more than that. What do we got? One for each branch? We're up to about 9,000 branches now with the addition of Space Force, of course. But Defense News has a Here's What Happens Next explainer if we wanted to check into the situation. And I guess we should, just to see where are we? Joint Chiefs vacancies loom amid Tuberville. Does he say Tuberville rather than Tuberville? It'd be very funny sounding if it was Tuberville, but I never did check on that one. Anyway, Joint Chiefs vacancies loom amid Tuberville's Senate standoff. And, here you go. A blanket hold by a lone U.S. senator on all high-level military promotions could prevent the confirmation of as many as 5 of the nominees to serve as the president's most senior military advisors. And it seems like the sort of thing that, one, you don't want to do to the country, like leave us without Joint Chief of Staff to confer with the president in the case of emergency. And 2, Republicans love the military, et cetera, except they want to leave them in a constant state of unreadiness when there's a Democratic president so that they can say, Democrats keep the military in a constant state of unreadiness. Anyway, that's the story. Says here also that 5 members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, including General Mark Milley, whose name was at the center of the recording of Trump confessing to his espionage on tape the other day, right? So including General Mark Milley, the chairman, they are required statutorily to leave their posts within the coming months, starting in July. Meanwhile, most of the vice chiefs, many of whom are the nominees or favorites to replace the chiefs, are preparing to assume leadership of the services amid the Senate impasse. Tuberville is doubling down on his blockade of military confirmations. He told Defense News that the looming vacancies will not prompt him to back down from his ongoing hold on hundreds of military promotions, including the Joint Chiefs. If they're worried about readiness, they need to get back to their old policy and we'll get it done, whatever that is, Tuberville said on Wednesday. But they're more worried about social programs than they are about military readiness. What's he talking about? Not entirely sure, but Defense News thinks it's this. The senator imposed his blockade in February to protest the Pentagon's new policy that provides leave time for troops to travel to receive abortion services if they're stationed in states where it's now illegal. The first service chief vacancy will occur when Marine Corps Commandant General David Berger steps down on July 10th, commencing a stream of exits from the Joint Chiefs through October. Army Chief of Staff General James McConville must step down next on August 8th, followed by Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Mike Gilday shortly after on August 21st. President Joe Biden, to you, it says so. Actually, President Joe Biden nominated Air Force Chief of Staff General C.Q. Brown as the next Joint Chiefs Chairman, replacing Milley, who must depart by early October, and creating another opening at the top of the Air Force. There's no playbook for this, Arnold Punaro, a former staff director on the Senate Armed Services Committee, said in an interview with Defense News. This is really a time for regular order and not the chaos and uncertainty that we see in the system right now. It's not the system, it's among Republicans. The tumult sends a terrible message about the seriousness with which the United States takes its military promotion process, he said. Again, it sends a terrible message about the seriousness with which Republicans take the United States military promotions process. It sends a sign of weakness to the rest of the world that we can't get our work done on time and that we're involved in political chaos. This has nothing to do with the individuals involved. We want the young officers and up-and-coming commanders to see that the military promotion system is based on merit and who is best qualified. Well, good luck with that one. Anyway, actually, let me continue on because Tuberville says something else senseless and dumb. The Senate typically confirms non-controversial military nominees, including the Joint Chiefs, using expedited floor procedures via unanimous consent, but any individual senator can block a unanimous consent request, allowing Tuberville to force the Senate to move through numerous procedural votes on each individual nominee. All they've got to do is put a vote on the floor and vote for it. And Tuberville told Defense News, all they've got to do is put it on the floor and vote for it. I'll vote for it. Tuberville's hold would require several weeks of limited Senate floor time to confirm the 5 Joint Chiefs nominees alone. Tuberville's blockade is also holding up more than 220 flag and general officer promotions, which would take an additional several months of scarce floor time if the Senate did nothing but confirm military nominees. The Senate expects to receive hundreds more military nominees in the coming months. Actually, this is fantastic because, and let me give credit to the writers here. I skipped over it because I just thought I was going to set up the situation. Bryant Harris, Stephen Losey, and Megan Eckstein, writing again for Defense News. And they cover the part that's very frequently either skipped or abbreviated such that it doesn't mean anything to anyone. How is it that a single senator, and this is what Hillzoy's complaint was, how is it that a single senator can hold this stuff up? And Hillzoy just calling for a rules change. Can't we get rid of this rule that allows a single senator to do this? And the answer is no, not really. I mean, we can make rules changes. This is true. But strictly speaking, if you're asking the question, can we get rid of the rule that allows this? The answer is no, because no rule allows this. There is a circumstance that grows out of the natural conclusion of these rules that are there, allow it. But it's not that easy to root out and get rid of. There's no rule that allows it that you can simply repeal or change. And there's no rule that says it's okay, and no rules that would possibly work, as I can think of it, that would mean that it would be easier. Remember, I mean, this is a pretty good setup or a pretty good explanation without getting too technical about what happens here. They, as Tuberville says, or as they say, his hold would require several weeks of limited floor time to confirm the Joint Chiefs alone. What is a hold? There is no rule that says there is such a thing as a hold. The hold is a matter of senatorial courtesy, which doesn't really have anything to do with courtesy either, by the way. But that's how it's frequently described. A hold is a proxy for a threat to filibuster. And it doesn't have to be an effective filibuster either. But what is happening here is everything in the Senate would and could move by unanimous consent if everybody agreed. But very frequently, there's 1 out of 100 at least who say, well, no, I won't give consent to that. I mean, no. And that's what he's saying is the case. I won't give unanimous consent, and I'll threaten to filibuster. Maybe. He's not even necessarily saying that in his comments, but again, you could, if you're doing it by unanimous consent, you could do something like, well, we have the 5 Joint Chiefs of Staff nominees, and we have hundreds, what did they say, 220 flag and general officer promotions. Maybe there's even more coming, as they said. And you can say, you can ask, I ask unanimous consent that all of these pending promotions that are on the calendar be agreed to, and deemed, be agreed to is really all you have to say. And they say yes. Then, ask if there's unanimous consent. And if there is, then boom, they're all done at once with one single motion in 1 second. But as soon as someone says no, then you say, all right, well, what's the other alternative for bringing these things to the floor? And Tuberville is saying, bring them to the floor. Go ahead. He's not even saying he would oppose them or actually, enter into any sort of filibuster. But in order to bring them to the floor, you have to make a motion to proceed to them. And of course, these things are done in executive session. So it's not a big deal to move to executive session, but it requires a motion to move from regular legislative session into executive session. And you can even, you can short circuit the process if you want to, shorten it. But if you just do it by regular order, you'd say, all right, well, we have 220 nominations to deal with, right? So you say, all right, I make a motion to go into executive session to consider presidential nominations. You can make it more specific if you want to. Presidential nominations for military officers, whatever, what have you. And, you can ask unanimous consent to move into executive session, but somebody may say no. And then you say, all right, I make a motion to proceed into executive session. Now, at that point, if somebody wants to be a jerk, they can not only say no to a unanimous consent request, but they can say, all right, well, you're going to have a vote on whether or not we're going to move into executive session. Even worse, you can also say, well, I think there should be extended debate on the question of whether or not we move into executive session. And you can filibuster the motion to go to executive session. However, I think that motion may be non-debatable now that I think about it. But there is a second opportunity, but that might I can't recall anymore. It's been a long time since we had to deal with a filibuster of a motion to proceed to executive session. But in addition, and I think you can do that, but you can also make the motion to go to executive session for the specific purpose of considering a particular nomination or some particular nominations. I think where the hang-up is. The more I think about it, the less I think that it's possible to filibuster the motion to proceed to executive session. But once you get into executive session, they discovered at some point somebody called up the nomination of, Joe Smith for whatever position, and there was a filibuster of the motion to proceed to consideration of that nomination. So one of the smart Senate majority leaders of yore invented a new form of motion that cut down the number, cut the number of filibusters possible in half by saying, all right, well, I'll move to go to executive session for the purpose of considering the nomination of Joe Smith, so that even if that motion is subject to filibuster, once they get past that filibuster and invoke cloture and move, and then therefore have the vote finally to move to executive session, it's a compound motion. And you not only move into executive session, but the first order of business is already set up for you. Now, the nomination itself can still be filibustered once you're in executive session, but you eliminate at least one of the filibusters. And remember that closing down a filibuster, even when it's 99-1, still means what? Having debate. Debate has to be going on for some certain amount of time before you can file for cloture, even if it's just an hour. You file for cloture, You got to get your 16 signatures, whatever. That's usually not a problem. But then the cloture motion has to ripen for 24 hours or so, right? And a 24-hour period has to pass in between the day upon which you file for cloture and the day upon which you vote for cloture. So at least 24 hours passes, even if you have managed to time things such that, you're doing things at 11:59 and then 12:01. But it still burns a day just to get around to the 99-1 vote to shut them down. And then there are 30 hours of post-cloture debate available to you as well. That burns another day. So you can see how it would go. We've been through the procedure before where you can burn about 4 days out of the, and 4 days is an entire Senate week. You can burn 3 to 4 days on a losing filibuster proposition, losing overwhelmingly. It still takes that long. So if you have, of course, 5 Joint Chiefs of Staff nominations to take care of, you can burn the better part of what is essentially a month or more of Senate time just dealing with that. If you have 220 military nominations, you'll be there all year. So that's all there is to it. There's no rule that says, yes, we allow one senator to hold things. It's just, there's unanimous consent as a procedural preference. And when that doesn't happen, you got to have a vote. And anything that you have a vote on that's debatable is subject to filibuster. And anything that's subject to filibuster has to see cloture invoked. And anything that has to see cloture invoked means waiting a day for a cloture motion to ripen and then blowing another day on post-cloture debate. And essentially, it's just, we can win every single one of these votes. There's zero doubt about being able to bulldoze past Tuberville on this. It's just not worth the time to do it. There are so many other things that need doing. We're just not going to sit here and run the clock 220 times in a row. So they've done a pretty good job of explaining the very basics of it for lay people here, I think, in saying that the Senate will typically confirm non-controversial nominees by unanimous consent, but any individual senator can block a unanimous consent request, and that's what allows Tuberville to force the Senate to move through numerous procedural votes. Now, I've told you what those votes are on each individual nominee, but he's even saying all they got to do is put it on the floor and I'll vote for it. So he'll be an even bigger jerk, right? He'll say, I object to unanimous consent. Schumer makes a motion to go to executive session for the consideration of some particular list of nominees, and it doesn't have to be just one at a time. I think you can do several, whatever you plan to do. Okay, fine. Let's say that's even non-debatable. They move to executive session and bring up the first nomination, and then he'll debate for a while, and he'll say, I don't know whether if he has no support whatsoever, he can stand there for a couple hours and talk if he wants to, or he can just keep doing quorum calls or whatever and keep things going until they get frustrated with him and file for cloture. Or he might not even object to a motion for cloture, and he'll vote for cloture, or he'll vote for the nomination. But he's going to make you jump through the procedural hoops every time and burn as many hours as possible. So that's interesting. It would be, he could make them waste all month doing these things, and then the vote will be 100-0 in favor of all of these nominees. But he just made you waste your day, month even. So Tuberville's hold would require several weeks of limited Senate floor time to confirm the 5 Joint Chiefs nominees alone. Tuberville's blockade is also holding up more than 220 flag and general officer promotions. That would take several months of scarce floor time if the Senate did nothing but confirm military nominees all day. The Senate expects to receive hundreds more military nominees in the coming months. Democratic leaders appear reluctant to use valuable floor time to confirm otherwise non-controversial nominees and worry that doing so will encourage other senators to block military promotions in order to extract policy concessions. Right? If you give me the national abortion ban vote that I wanted, or put it into the appropriations bills even, or whatever it is, right? then I'll stop blocking them. But then, there are another 48 senators who might be just as jerky and say, I want something else. And, it's a little worrisome if that happens. Yes. And even if they never get the policy concessions, you'd have to defeat every one of them in turn. And also, of course, Republicans being in the minority in the Senate are probably happy to see, and with a Democrat in the White House, would probably be happy to see a total stalemate on all legislation. The less the Congress does, the better in their view. Of course, I feel the same way about the House of Representatives, so we're even. The Senate cannot encourage this behavior by handing out rewards for holding up hundreds of nominees. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who chairs the military personnel panel, told Defense News. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer repeatedly declined to commit to scheduling floor votes on the Joint Chiefs nominees when pressed by reporters at a Wednesday press conference. What Senator Tuberville has done is just awful, Schumer told Defense News. We believe that Republican senators, if they care about national security, should be putting pressure on him to release the holds. And they should be. Mitch McConnell said last month he disagrees with Tuberville's military holds. John Cornyn told Defense News he hoped the issue could be resolved with a vote on the Pentagon's abortion policy in the fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act. Maybe. A suggestion that Tuberville shot down. I guess he just wasn't interested in any sort of accommodation after all. I don't want to put it in the NDAA and then hold it up because you're going to have people that will be against it, Tuberville told Defense News. I'd rather have the Defense Department draw something up, send it over here, and let's vote on it, stand alone. Well, you're not actually in the military, so you can't order them to do it. What happens next? The fact that the same nominees tapped to lead the services will fill in for the vacancies in their capacity as the number 2 officer provides the Senate with little immediate incentive to resolve the impasse. You'll just have a bunch of acting Joint Chiefs. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Wow, pardon me. Anyway, I didn't mean to spend the entire segment on this, but it's a good reminder of the value of understanding the procedural rules. And in making my comment back to Hillzoy, I did get a response that, well, yes, I understand that there's no rule that actually allows this stuff, but the point still stands. I refuse to believe that there isn't another way of dealing with this or handling these nominations. And that's probably true. But so long as they're in the hands of the Senate, my only response there is I don't know what sort of rule you could design. You could certainly eliminate the filibuster, but you'd have to do a lot more tinkering with the way things work and just general tinkering with how legislative bodies work. Like, I don't know how you design a rule that prohibits a senator from objecting to a unanimous consent request. Like, can I have unanimous consent to do this? Well, I don't consent. Okay. I mean, all right, so from now on, you're not allowed to respond when I ask for unanimous consent, or each senator gets one free shot at objecting to unanimous consent per week or something like that. Well, if you're asking for consent, we probably shouldn't be in the business of telling people that they're not allowed to withhold consent from things, right? So you might say there's perhaps a rule that says every military nomination will receive a vote within a week of its being scheduled on the calendar. But you'll just find that, obstructionist majority leaders will stop putting people on the calendar as a way of doing things, or that, they may say, we refuse to bring this forward. Well, the rules say it has to happen within a week. Yeah, well, what are you going to do? Arrest me? I'm not doing it. And, I'll just, we'll hold a vote that says this rule doesn't mean what it says. Any body that can make up its own rules of procedure with a majority vote is unlikely to agree to be controlled by rules certainly from the outside, proposed from the outside, about how you have to do things. But yeah, there's certainly other ways to appoint military leaders. By force is one of them, or by national referendum, I guess, is another one, or by lottery, or by, we could come up with a rule that says that, right, as the military names them, the Senate has a week to act on it, and if they don't, then they're presumed approved. They're all terrible ideas in the end if you really think about how they would work, but there are other systems. There's just no system within our constitutional one, our current constitutional one, that calls for the advice and consent of the Senate. You're talking about getting rid of that, which might be fine. There are people who are interested in eliminating the Senate, but I don't know what the alternative is, and it seems like a long walk for getting some military nominations sped up. The same thing happens for executive branch nominations and all legislation, for that matter. It takes a long time, and floor time in the Senate is at a premium, and as long as the place at first tries to operate by unanimous consent, it's going to take time. How long does it take to get unanimous agreement of 100 politically interested people in anything? It takes a while. It's a slow-moving process, and it's supposed to be. It's bad news, but that was the design anyway. So what does happen next? Well, there can be acting chairs, acting joint chiefs and chairs, I guess. The procedural expert, or whatever, who are they talking to? Punaro, before his name's come up before, and I forget what his description of his position was. I'm going to scroll back. Arnold Punaro, former staff director for the Senate Armed Services Committee, had further comment to add. Punaro said vice chiefs would step in and perform those duties to keep the services running on a day-to-day basis. Similarly, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Christopher Grady, would temporarily perform the duties of chairman if Brown is not confirmed by the beginning of October. Delaying the start of the new chiefs' tenures hinders their ability to start making their desired changes to their services, he said. General Eric Smith, the Marines' number 2 officer and Biden's nominee for commandant, is scheduled for a confirmation hearing on Tuesday. Given Smith's current role as assistant commandant, the Marines are preparing for Smith to perform the commandant's duty when Berger leaves on July 10th, even if the Senate has not confirmed him by then. The confirmation hearings for other Joint Chiefs nominees, including Brown, are slated for July. That includes Army Vice Chief General Randy George to replace McConville. Biden has yet to nominate a new Chief of Naval Operations, but Navy Vice Chief Admiral Lisa Franchetti is widely considered the favorite for the position. And of course, Biden will have to nominate a new Air Force Chief of Staff to replace Brown, with current Air Force Vice Chief General David Alvin considered the front-runner. Senate Armed Services Chairman Jack Reed told Defense News it would be absolutely irresponsible not to have a congressionally confirmed service chief. Senators have held up non-controversial nominees for more frequently in recent years. For instance, Senator Josh Hawley imposed a blanket hold on all Defense Department civilian nominations for more than a year. They target military nominees less frequently. Senator Tammy Duckworth was the last senator to do so in 2020. Her hold lasted less than 2 weeks before she lifted it. By contrast, Tuberville's hold has lasted more than 3 months with no end in sight. What goes around comes around, Reid told Defense News. If basically this succeeds, then the next 2 years from now, someone who wants an assault weapons ban will say, gee, I'll just hold up all the generals. Except that while there's a Democrat in the White House, Republicans won't care if you hold up all the generals. So we'll see whether what goes around indeed comes around. So I thought pretty thoroughly well reported, that one, and an opportunity to fill in the blanks and give a little bit more detail. Unplanned, but that's what's there. All right, let's see. What did Greg have in mind for us today? We might as well have a look at it, see what's in the raft stories. Let's see. First up is screen grab here. Oh, is this docket stuff from Miami? Yes, okay. Minute order for proceedings held before Magistrate Judge Jonathan Goodman. Initial appearance, it's cut off here, but it's the arraignment, of course, of Donald Trump. Let's see. Christopher Kise appears as counsel of record. We've heard that name before. I heard he was having difficulty getting a full legal team together. Lots of people were declining to take his case. Maybe just because the people who do take his case keep ending up in legal trouble, plus not getting paid. Evan Corcoran now, of course, finds himself having to testify probably as a witness against the guy who was supposed to be his client in the Pervolago documents case, because Trump, put it to him point blank, I need you to commit some crimes for me, and he had to decline, and he had to tell the court and the FBI about those requests to commit a crime, because, of course, a request like that is subject to the crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege. So nobody really wants to be in that position, and they've seen what's happened to Corcoran, and they just don't want it to happen to them. Other people are either just too loyal to Trump to say no, or think they're too smart to get into such a situation. But, IQ doesn't matter much when a leopard wants to eat your face. I mean, up to the point, except for using your IQ to say, oh, there's a leopard over there, I'm not going there. Now, normally, if you can spot the leopard and he can spot you, there's not a great deal you can do if you don't, to not be chased down by the leopard if he wants to get you. But you could say, I'm not going to leopard habitat or something like that. And, you don't even need a great deal of IQ points to be able to make that decision, but it would help. Let's see. He's also sent me something from the Bird site. What's happening here? Ed Whelan tweeting, Ed Whelan from, where? EPPC. What's EPPC? I don't know. Ethics and Public Policy Center, and also blogging at the NRO Bench Memos. Okay. What's happening? There may well be reasonable arguments about the prudence of prosecuting Trump. There aren't. But I don't see how anyone could think that the conduct alleged in the indictment isn't criminal. Instead of denying the allegations, Trump's defenders are making ridiculous arguments on law. Yes, and saying things, of course, like it's going to destroy the country if we prosecute a former president. Well, it's going to destroy the country if former presidents can commit violations of the Espionage Act at will and not be prosecuted. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It might be best to say, let's air it all out in an atmosphere where you get in trouble in substantial and substantive ways if you lie, and settle it there. I think it's probably best settled in court in terms of having some shot at getting at the truth, even if it has to be a trial conducted by Aileen Cannon. So, we'll at least be able to then get an appeal of her rulings and see if we draw a panel that, will actually follow precedent and logic like the last 11th Circuit panel. But I can't guarantee that even that same panel would be willing to do the same thing more than once. I really don't know. All right, let's see. What other suggestions has Greg got for the Rafto stories today? Oh, how about this? From out of Illinois, where Governor JB Pritzker signs a law prohibiting book bans in Illinois. That's good news. CBS Chicago reporting on this one. Illinois is the first state in the U.S. to outlaw book bans. A ban on bans, yes. After Governor JB Pritzker on Monday signed legislation that would cut off state funding for any Illinois library that tries to ban books. That should be an interesting situation when you see that coming down the pike. The new law comes as predominantly Republican-led states continue to restrict books some consider offensive in schools and libraries across the country. Bans are about censorship, marginalizing people, marginalizing ideas and facts. Regimes ban books, not democracies, Pritzker said before signing the legislation Monday at the Harold Washington Library in the Loop. According to the American Library Association, there were 67 attempts to ban books in Illinois in 2022. Under the Illinois Library System Act, Illinois libraries would only be eligible for state funding if they adhere to the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, which holds that books should not be proscribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. The new law takes effect January 1st, 2024. Why it couldn't be immediate, I couldn't tell you. But there you have it. We could look into that, but I think that would probably be a distraction at this point. And that's it for his suggestions this morning via Skype. Not that that's it for the suggestions via the abbreviated pundit roundup, of course. There are more, and some of them, in fact, quite relevant in their own right. Let's see. Let me reload Pocket here. I forgot to do that yesterday, and all the things I loaded in Pocket pre-show didn't show up because I hadn't refreshed the page. But in the APR today, although I'm sure he wants to discuss some of this stuff tomorrow, just to give you, or to give me, really, an update on what happened yesterday afternoon, I thought I would take a peek in here. The APR disgraced and twice impeached, twice indicted former president arraigned. Arraigned again, I should say, says Greg, and this time in Miami, according to the Washington Post here. Let's see. After scowling through a court hearing, the former president tries to fundraise and hype his candidacy. Trump has denied wrongdoing in each case. He suffered another legal setback, by the way, on Tuesday when a federal judge in Manhattan ruled that writer E. Jean Carroll could add new defamation claims to a lawsuit she's filed against him. I guess those would be the additional new complaints based on what he said at the CNN town hall. So we were wondering whether those would be added, and there were doubters whether there was an opportunity to do so or whether it was strategically wise to do so. But there you have it. They are allowed to be added. I presume they'll take that allowance and go ahead and add them. Carroll, of course, recently won a $5 million judgment against Trump in a different civil lawsuit in New York after a jury found Trump sexually abused her decades ago and then later defamed her. And, of course, there's more to come in Georgia and D.C. And, all right, let's see. By the way, it says the Post got it right. No need to flatter the former guy. Jennifer Rubin gets a mention, as she frequently does these days, in the APR about Aileen Cannon, saying Aileen Cannon should not preside over the Trump trial. And I agree, but she might end up doing it anyway. The 11th Circuit's ruling, when they reversed her in the special master part of the case, was particularly dismissive in reversing Cannon. And the quote was, "The law is clear. We cannot write a rule that allows any subject of a search warrant to block government investigations after the execution of a warrant, nor can we write a rule that allows only former presidents to do so. Specifically, the panel held she didn't have jurisdiction and should not have ruled on the case. To make matters worse, In the civil case, Cannon posited that Trump deserved special treatment because he is a former president. And the quote here from her ruling, I guess, as a function of plaintiff's former position as president of the United States, the stigma associated with the subject seizure is in a league of its own. A judge who begins with the unconstitutional premise that Trump is not subject to the law, like any other defendant, would have a hard time sustaining public faith in the process. Any rulings for Trump would be regarded as evidence of bias. Rulings against would be seen as efforts to restore her shattered reputation. Yeah, there's really no way for her to conduct this thing properly. But, like I said, I'm a little worried that the Southern District of Florida, the chief judge there, whoever that may be, might be of a mind to say, well, we're just going to have to wait to see whether she's learned her lesson or not. If not, we can always remove her later. But I don't know. That might be more damaging than just doing it, ripping the Band-Aid off right at the beginning. Okay, let's see. I guess we could leave most of the rest of this stuff for discussion tomorrow, if necessary. But there are a lot more. It's clearly all about Trump and the reactions to Trump, the punditry on Trump. And I guess that is something we could probably leave for Greg's discussion tomorrow. We want him to have something to do, right? There's plenty more, of course, for us to talk about, including, I don't know. What else did I put aside here? Some of these things are oh, yes, right. I'm not sure what these are until I click through because they're social media posts. This is interesting. I don't know. It has nothing to do with anything, but totally out of the blue. But the sort of thing that you see on social media and say, yeah, that is interesting. Would make an interesting topic of conversation. Maybe not a whole segment here, but what am I looking at here? A Mastodon tweet from Cohen, K-O-E-N, Cohen Huffkins, PhD. But I'm glad that they put PhD at the end, not because it's so interesting to see what their credentials are, although that does sometimes help. But otherwise, Cohen, which is K-O-E-N, and his first name here, would otherwise make me think, is this like a law firm? Cohen Huffkins, like C-O-H-E-N, but it's K-O-E-N. I don't know how he pronounces that either. But anyway, this is the news here from CNN that apparently Instant Brands, the maker now of the Instant Pot, and I guess the owner of Pyrex as well, Pyrex Goods, is filing for bankruptcy, which seems like a bit of a surprise. But as Cohen here points out, all lasting things are strangled by VC, venture capital, and debt loading for a quick profit. We've certainly discussed that subject. It's been a while since we discussed what I called, locust capitalism. But back in the Mitt Romney days. But the parent company of Pyrex and Instant Pot filing for bankruptcy under Chapter 11. These companies are staples in many households. I agree. But often, once-in-a-decade purchases are not aligned with a 6% per year shareholder revenue model, I guess I would say. Expect decreasing quality and increasing costs from whatever is left after. And just, I guess we'll long story short this one because we can't justify spending a whole segment on this, I don't think. But, interesting point. Like Pyrex, I have Pyrex measuring cups in the house. I'm sure of that. And a couple of, Pyrex pie plates and things like that. And these are things that have been around since forever. And that's really the point here. And some of these pie dishes, pie plates are, I'm sure, come from the in-laws' house. They were purchased and have been in service in our family's households probably for 50 plus years. But that's the issue, is now Instant Pot has yet to prove that they can live up to that reputation. But I've got an Instant Pot and we use it fairly frequently. Some people, have them and they don't like them, or they never get used to using them and they collect dust, but they don't seem to fall apart very often. I mean, we've used and abused our Instant Pot quite a bit. Seems to be working as well today as the day we bought it, but that's only been a couple of years. The Pyrex stuff, forget about it. That's indestructible. And that's the point. In venture capital world, nobody wants to invest in the company that makes things of such lasting quality and value that consumers are not having to buy replacements all the time. If you buy an Instant Pot, you're kind of out of the Instant Pot market. They can sell you accessories all day long. But even then, people we're stopped buying accessories because there's nowhere to put all the damn accessories. So anyway, but am I buying a new Instant Pot anytime soon? No. I don't anticipate needing one ever again. I guess, I'm after some point of time, something's going to break, I guess. But if it's 15 years, Instant Pot can't sit around waiting to bring me a new one. There's a lot of consumers in the world, and they could bring them to them while they're waiting for me to come around and replace my Instant Pot. But it's not working with Pyrex. I haven't replaced these measuring cups. Certainly in the 30 years that we've been in this house, those pie plates were passed down at this point. So, yeah, I guess you get a bit of a problem. And so how amazing is that another feature of locust venture capitalism is it's a bad investment to invest in companies that make products that are so good and so durable and long lasting that everybody wants to have them in their house because of how long lasting they are. The problem is once you get one in the house, that's the end of it. They don't need another one for the rest of their lives. So you can see how it would work. But yeah, so here they are going bankrupt for having made products so well that everybody, values them and their reputation. But too bad as investments go. It's an interesting thought. And I wonder what the CNN article has to say about this stuff. Again, I meant not to justify a whole segment, but it looks like just a blurb. Anything of interest in here? The company blamed tighter credit and higher interest rates as contributing factors. Okay. But the company added that it has seen rapid growth since the start of the pandemic, entering several new product categories and expanding its global footprint. That's an interesting thing. With people doing more baking, I guess, during that stuff. All right. Well, let's see. My mom chimes in to say that the Pyrex thing has been under discussion on YouTube for a while. So I guess, I don't know. That's of interest. And I guess there's a warning, a YouTube warning to say why Pyrex dishes shatter. I'll tell you what, it's not been my experience. Can you make them shatter? I guess so. Is there a YouTube video that will show you how you can shatter them? Yeah. Don't watch it because you'll shatter your dishes. I guess. I don't know. We have, like I said, 50-year-old Pyrex stuff that belonged to in-laws that, got passed on. And they're so heavy and indestructible. And I guess, don't put them in any blast furnaces or microwaves, I guess, if microwaves are what's doing it. Anyway, as we point out here, Instant Brands, what are they doing owning Pyrex? Pyrex has been around a million years. Instant Pot's been around, 10 years. So, but I guess basically it ended up being Instant Pot people made a ton of money when their instrument went viral and everybody bought them all at once. They made a ton of money. So they bought Pyrex, probably thinking, well, here's a company that's got it right. They've been in business for 100 years. It says here Pyrex is 108 years old. Corningware, I guess they also bought Corningware, similar, same sort of market sector, 65 years old. Instant Pot was only launched in 2010. The company said at least one of its products can be found in 90% of U.S. homes. The problem, of course, is that nobody needs another one once you've bought them. And Instant Pot, I don't know who made the decision making here and whether they thought it through and what the justification was, but I think they bought into the wrong sector and they might have diversified elsewhere rather than in super durable cookware, though we really don't know anything about the durability of Instant Pot in terms of, Pyrex Corningware type lifespan. Anyway, as it turns out, more comments from my mom that says, well, it's the old type versus the new type of Pyrex. I guess the new Pyrex stuff, not as durable and subject to shattering, according to this YouTube video that she's pointing out. But that just brings us back to that Cohen-Hofkins's first tweet and the warning at the end of it: expect decreasing quality and increasing costs from whatever is left after, right? Once the VCs behind, who funded the acquisition of Pyrex and Corningware by Instant Pot or Instant Brands, whatever they call themselves, once they did that, that would have then necessitated a lot of cost cutting, and you'd probably be putting out less durable and more inferior products just in order to keep costs down so that you could pay out to the VCs who thought that they were going to be able to give their investors 6 to 10% a year in profits, and you suffer as a result. So there you go. Again, I think we should try and escape from this topic at this point. But it's a pervasive problem. Okay, so let's see. Other things to discuss, even though the break is coming up. I guess that really did end up eating up more of the subject. We got more for the second half of the show, the second hour. More about Aileen Cannon. More about what to do. More about what could happen. More about what could happen just from bringing the indictment in general. And also some chiming in on the classification categories and what the implications of bringing a national security case like this might be, from Evan Corin, who chimes in with us every once in a while, writing at Substack, and who has a classified, a career in handling classified information and documents like this, and so a firsthand knowledge of how seriously people will take this, what these various designations might mean, and what's really at stake here. So, an exciting second half of the show is on tap, and let's see, do we want to make any promises about what else we want to bring here? Some discussion of Silvio Berlusconi's departure from the temporal plane, and you know what? Actually, piquing interest, more interest than I thought there was going to be. Maybe we were right to waste time in discussing the PGA Tour Live golf deal, because apparently the United States Senate set now to open an investigation into this deal. So it's probably not just that they want to study golf. They must have some sort of justification. And if they don't, Greg will be interested because it's Senator Blumenthal leading the charge here. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let me jump back to, I was just checking all the social media inputs here. Mighty OCD has a good point on this one, but we're back to Instant Pot. So, anyway, Instant Pot and Pyrex, he says, would be fine if private equity hadn't loaded them up with debt. That's probably true. There is the issue of, well, we're selling our things and they're pretty durable, and so our sales aren't giant. I guess the real issue here is, you can continue with that model because there are a lot of people in the world, and those and a lot of households, more every day. Some of them don't have Pyrex measuring cups or pie plates. Some of them have cheap ones that need replacing, and they end up getting replaced with Pyrex. Sometimes they break. Sometimes they're lost. Sometimes you just need more. Whatever. Sometimes you forget you already have one and you go buy another one. And there's enough people in the world. The market is large enough that you can survive that way. But it's not necessarily a booming business. But if it's stable, there's a way to loot it, essentially, and ruin it for profit. And that, of course, is what he thinks is going on here. And I have to think so, too. Not necessarily just because it's contractual. You people didn't know that. I have to agree with Mighty OCD no matter what happens. But this is true, and we've discussed this before. This does bring us all the way back to the Mitt Romney days when we were kind of explaining or learning and passing on to you what we thought we had learned on the show about the nature of locust venture vulture capitalism. The second comment here begins to get at that. Cornell Capital bought Pyrex because their credit and reputation was flawless. Why? Because they make a great product. Everybody who has them in their house, they pay a premium for these durable goods, and the reputation is sterling, and they're doing fine, and they're 100 years old. So what do? You buy that company not because you say, I'd like to continue these practices and just run it as a going concern, but because you can loot the place. Now, you and I, stupid brains, would say, what do you mean we're going to loot the place? I mean, there's a certain amount of money, I'm sure, in the bank. Can we take that? That's simple enough. But then what are we going to do? What am I going to do with 1 million Pyrex measuring cups? How do I turn that into cash? Why is that good for me? Well, remember how these guys operate, right? You buy the company because it's stable. And because it's stable, it has flawless credit, right? So because it has flawless credit, it can borrow money at favorable rates. Now, normally, why would they be borrowing money at favorable rates? If they're borrowing money at all, even though they're making a mint on measuring cups and pie plates, if they're borrowing money at all, they're usually doing it to reinvest in the company. Let's retool, let's build a new factory so that new generations in other markets, we've saturated the American market with pie plates. Let's make sure that everybody in Bangladesh has our pie plates. I don't know, whatever it is you're doing, whatever your strategy is. But that doesn't appear really anywhere necessarily on the forms, although sometimes they ask you what you're going to use your loan for. But basically what you do as a venture capital, locust capitalist, you buy up one of these companies with excellent credit rating and use it to borrow, right? And I don't know what you tell the bank. The bank might not even care whether or not you're using it to invest in the company or not. But at any rate, you're the board now, so you take out a gigantic loan that a board that, full of Corning family members or something like that, who were running this as a family business for so many years, might otherwise have said, no, we reject this proposal. We don't want to take this loan. You take the loan, and instead of investing in anything in particular, you basically you could just say, well, for one thing, we're going to use the loan to pay the management fees of, I guess, Cornell Capital here, so that we can, because of how fantastically we're managing everything. We bought the place, and now we've hired ourselves as consultants on how to run it, and we're going to use Cornell Capital's cash to pay those consulting fees to ourselves. And when Cornell Capital, or rather when Pyrex and everybody else runs out of money to pay Cornell Capital their consulting fees, we'll just borrow from the bank and pay more of them. Or we'll pay bonuses to ourselves. Or, maybe they do have an investment idea, but it sucks and everybody knows it, but they indulge themselves anyway because they can. They're the board now. So, right, like as we're saying here, Cornell Capital bought Pyrex, says Mighty OCD, because their credit and reputation was flawless, so they could load it up with debt, pay themselves piles of money, and now walk away. Same old story. We've certainly seen it with other companies, but it's kind of sad to see it with something that's been in business for 100 years, but that's what makes it such a juicy target, right? Banks in the area have been loaning to Pyrex, Corningware, etc., Instant Pot too, probably, although only for the last couple of years, without worries. And now, not so great. And of course, if those loans don't get paid back, the company goes into bankruptcy, not the people who directed the company to borrow all that money, knowing that there was no intention of paying it back. So, another amazing locust capitalism story. And then finally, same reason they bought Instapot. So it wasn't that the Instant Pot people got rich on their product and went and acquired more product lines, but rather that Cornell Capital, and is Cornell Capital based up there in upstate New York too? I don't know. Corning certainly always was. Maybe they were created for the purpose of buying out Corning, for that matter, and looting it. But it was even worse. Somehow it seemed a little bit more justifiable if somebody in the cookware sector decides to diversify, although Bad diversification. The rest of cookware. But anyway, it was just somebody saying there's opportunity to loot some companies here and I'm going to go and do it. That is rather sad. Okay. Now, I think on to other things. Let's see. Maybe we focus on, we'll go back to the former guy. That's still a big deal in the news, and we should clear out some of these things from the docket so that Greg has his opportunity to bring his angles on it tomorrow, and we get everything covered. What about Aileen Cannon? What a nut, huh? Let's see. Did we look at this yesterday? I don't think so. There's another piece in Slate. Slate's going crazy about Aileen Cannon, and rightly so. She's bananas, as we explained yesterday, and lots of room for mischief. Aileen Cannon's previous rulings about Trump demand her recusal. Well, that's true, but so what? But apparently this was sort of being billed as a what to do here. What can we do about getting Aileen Cannon off the case? Is that the one? Or I have another one here. We've got that. And this one came to me under the title of How to Force Judge Aileen Cannon Off the Trump Case. That's no longer the working title here. There's also a piece in Slate running under, at least in pocket, under the headline of The Solution to the Trump Judge Problem Nobody Wants to Talk About. So we won't talk about that one because I don't want to. But, but we will. So here's what you need to know about the thing that no one will talk about except me, who's telling you he's about to talk about these things. Never liked those constructions. Anyway, Norm Eisen, Richard Painter, and Fred Wertheimer get the bylines on the first piece. Cannon's previous rulings demand her recusal. Yes, but so what? Let's find out so what. Soon after the news broke that Trump, I'm going to have to abbreviate this to get through all these things a bit. So soon after the news that broke that Trump will be the first former president to face federal criminal charges, you know what they are. It was also revealed that Judge Aileen Cannon is scheduled to oversee the case. In our view, as experts with more than a century of collective experience in judicial and ethics questions that cannot stand, she must recuse herself from the case, or if she refuses, be reassigned by the appropriate judicial oversight authorities. Well, whoop-de-doo. How's it going to go? Tell us. Her name may be familiar to many. Judge Cannon heard Trump's challenge to the government's classified documents investigation, appointed a special master to review the documents, and temporarily barred the Justice Department from using those records in its investigation. That much-maligned decision was later reversed by a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, consisting of 3 conservative judges, 2 Trump appointees, and the George W. Bush-appointed Chief Judge William Pryor. William Pryor, by the way, just since we were spending so much time on filibusters in the beginning of the show, one of the George W. Bush nominees that was filibustered at first, what was it, like 5 top circuit court judge nominees that were filibustered by Democrats, precipitating the first nuclear option standoff that was, quote unquote, solved for us by the Gang of 14, one of the more famous of that era of gangs. Pryor was on that list. He got by in the end, as you can see. They wrote Pryor and these 2 Trump appointees to the 11th Circuit that her decision, Cannon's, violated clear law and that her approach would be a radical reordering of our case law, limiting the federal court's involvement in criminal investigations and violate bedrock separation of powers limitations. Now, that same investigation has resulted in an indictment against Trump. Judge Cannon's prior fundamentally erroneous approach casts a shadow over the proceedings. Because her earlier handling of the case went well outside the judicial norm and was roundly criticized by the Court of Appeals, reasonable observers of this case could question her impartiality. Federal law has a way to deal with this challenge. Under 28 U.S. Code Section 455A, a judge, quote, shall disqualify himself or herself in any proceeding in which his or her impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Well, I mean, you shall, but what if you don't, right? Judge Cannon's situation clearly fits that test, and she is obligated to recuse herself in Trump's case. Recusal is necessary here to avoid serious concerns about Cannon's impartiality in the public eye. The judicial recusal rule is about preserving the public's confidence in the judicial system. It does not require a showing of actual bias. Rather, as the Supreme Court has explained, it simply asks whether an objective observer in the public would have questioned the judge's impartiality. That is clearly the case with Judge Cannon. It is irrelevant whether a judge subjectively believes herself to be impartial, because the statute aims at ensuring both justice and the appearance of justice. A federal judge must recuse if facts connected to the judge's actions in the case would cause an objective observer to doubt the fairness of the proceedings. Several features of this case make it clear that members of the public will harbor serious concerns about the fairness of the proceedings and Judge Cannon's impartiality well beyond the objective observer standard. First, it's common knowledge that Judge Cannon already took the deeply erroneous step of ordering federal prosecutors to refrain from using material seized from Mar-a-Lago in their investigation when she appointed that special master to review whether those materials were subject to executive or attorney-client privilege. The charges here are the direct result of the investigation that her order temporarily halted. Second, Judge Cannon's other statements and actions in the prior proceedings made clear her view that Trump is entitled to different treatment, deferential really is what it should say, treatment more so than any other criminal defendant. She wrote that as a function of plaintiff's former position as president of the United States, the stigma associated with the subject seizure is in a league of its own, right? We heard that from Jennifer Rubin. She reiterated this position in denying the government's motion for a partial stay of her order pending appeal, stating that her consideration, quote, is inherently impacted by the position formerly held by Trump. After the 11th Circuit rejected her position and granted a partial stay to allow the government to use classified materials and remove them from the special master's review, she still ruled for Trump on procedural issues over the views of the special master she appointed. As the ultra-conservative panel of the 11th Circuit forcefully explained when finally dismissing Trump's civil action in its entirety, it was Judge Cannon's attempt to carve out an unprecedented exception in our law for former presidents that was in a league of its own. Third, federal courts have explained in related contexts that prior reversals of a judge's decision in a case can support the conclusions that the judge would have difficulty putting her previous views and findings aside, and that another judge taking the case would be appropriate to preserve the appearance of justice. Here, Judge Cannon has issued a repeated series of decisions that were harshly criticized by the appellate authorities as being far outside the law. That is a pattern that leads to the inelucutable appearance of bias. Did I have that word correct? Notably, the prior erroneous rulings had to do with the treatment of classified documents, and she had to be schooled by the DOJ and then the 11th Circuit on her cavalier attitude. These decisions are directly related to the current charges, and she will have to deal with those issues constantly, including under the Classified Information Procedures Act, or CIPA, the complex statute governing how a court deals with the intricacies of a criminal prosecution involving classified information. And all this on top of the fact that she's the only judge in her division of Fort Pierce, and that for security reasons, the U.S. Marshal will likely insist the case be tried in Miami, where the arraignment will occur. There are also substantial logistical reasons for her to step aside. That provides Judge Cannon with an elegant exit opportunity, should she choose to take it, without even having to address the significant conflict issues, right? She could say, my chambers are in Fort Pierce. Security requires that the trial be held in Miami, and I don't want to go to Miami every day. Have one of the judges who's already in Miami every day take care of this one. So, to be clear, our concern is not that Judge Cannon is a Trump appointee. The conflict of interest is that she's already issued unusual and profoundly wrong decisions favoring the defendant in this case that have been severely criticized and overturned, again, by conservative or Trump-appointed judges. So they're not unwilling to lean on that as an issue. Yet another dimension of recusal that judges sometimes consider is whether it would have practical downsides. But there are no such costs here to another judge overseeing Trump's case. The proceeding is still in a nascent stage, and the bulk of pretrial motions, discovery, and hearings, which will likely be extensive, have yet to occur. But what if Judge Cannon does not recuse herself? Well, one possibility that should be explored is for the Chief Judge of the District Court, Chief Judge Cecilia Altanaga, to reassign the case pursuant to the court's power under federal law to assign cases so far as local rules and orders do not otherwise prescribe. Nothing in the Southern District of Florida's local rules or internal operating procedures is to the contrary. Those local procedures provide for Judge Cannon and her colleagues to agree to transfer the case to another judge. The Chief Judge should have a vigorous discussion with her under that provision. If Judge Cannon demurs, though, the rules are silent about what happens next, and so the federal statute comes into play for the Chief Judge to reassign the case. She, too, can point to logistical concerns, including security ones, in reassigning it to a judge in Miami, saving face for Judge Cannon, if they want to. We recognize that such intervention by the Chief Judge is not an everyday occurrence. If it doesn't happen, though, there are other options. The more likely possibility here, if the Southern District of Florida chooses not to deal with this issue, is that the 11th Circuit should be called upon to reassign the case to a different judge at the earliest opportunity. As the case is lodged at the trial court level and is not before the circuit at the moment, that reassignment would likely come as part of a reversal on appeal of one of Judge Cannon's decisions, at which point it'll kind of already be too late, but all right. Under binding 11th Circuit precedents, a case should be reassigned to a different judge if, among other reasons, the original judge would have difficulty setting aside her previous views, and findings in reassignment would not result in a waste of judicial resources. Those factors clearly weigh in favor of reassignment here due to the difficulties that Judge Cannon will have, likely, in diverging from her previous unorthodox and wrongful rulings benefiting Trump. This is the path that appears most likely to be pursued if Judge Cannon is to be removed, because her approach thus far suggests that it's unlikely that the judge will recuse herself. DOJ might choose to make the case in a recusal motion that it would be better for her and everyone concerned if she stepped aside. In just about any other high-profile criminal case, if a trial judge were to err in the direction of excessive leniency favoring a criminal defendant in a preliminary hearing and were reversed on appeal, law and order conservatives would be the first to say that the trial judge had a conflict and should be removed. That judge's reputation would be on trial. Impartiality would be too dubious. The same is true here, except, of course, that it would be in favor of their favorite guy, and so they would remain silent. Not just remain silent, but actively work to keep her on the case, because gimmitarianism. But the department may, DOJ that is, as they often do, take the more conservative approach to recusal. If so, they may instead wait for the judge to overstep once more, and at that point ask her, and if she refuses, ask the 11th Circuit to act. They could do so as part of the appeal of that particular issue, if it is available pre-trial, as are all SEPA rulings on classified document handling, the general area where she stumbled before. Or, if a Cannon ruling is sufficiently outrageous on an issue that is not normally appealable before trial, they could seek mandamus, available in unusual situations where a district judge is failing to perform their duty. If seeking reassignment by the 11th Circuit is the outcome here, that'll require a bit of patience by all of us. Still, if the special master case is any indication, we should not have a long wait for an erroneous decision by Judge Cannon, although we would be pleased to be proven wrong. Ultimately, Judge Cannon should do the ethical thing and recuse herself. If she chooses not to, DOJ should be watchful for the first opportunity to seek reassignment by the 11th Circuit. The reputation of the 11th Circuit and the ability of their judges, both trial and appellate, to handle sensitive cases with an absence of bias are at stake here. So is the public's confidence in the outcome of one of the most important criminal trials in the history of our republic. Not to mention the American people's faith in the entire criminal justice system. Ultimately, a failure to recuse or reassign could well do great damage to the core American principle that no one, not even a former president, is above the law. So, in conclusion, I guess long story short here is they really should, but they might not. And they might not listen, and the judge may not listen even if they try and do it. And in the end, although there are supposedly fail-safe measures, we come back to what we had concluded before. It could require costly mistakes to be made first and valuable time to be wasted first before the 11th Circuit or the DOJ or anybody else comes around to the conclusion inevitably that, yes, she should be reassigned. And then by that point, there will be weight to the argument that switching judges at this point, with so much having already gone on, would be problematic or a waste of judicial resources or whatever. So, not particularly reassuring, that article. Let's see whether there's anything in the solution to the Trump judge problem that nobody wants to talk about. This one is Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern, maybe a little more pointed, as they frequently are. Let's see. Which one are we not talking about? But they are, but we will be shortly, or something like that. It's illustrated, by the way, of that photo of the person that I guess there's still some question as to whether or not, or at least according to some of the fact-checker types, as to whether or not this is, in fact, Aileen Cannon here in the face paint and the Team Trump cowboy hat. But pretty wacky either way. Anyway, they have this to say, Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern. Legal analysts lit up social media on Monday in response to the broad and potentially devastating order by Aileen Cannon. This is the old one. Dang. This is, all right. I was like, there wasn't any order by her on Monday. This is from September of 2022. So, I guess we didn't implement the solution to the Trump judge problem that nobody wants to talk about. Or maybe we talked about it and it didn't happen or it didn't work. What are they saying here? This was, of course, in response to Cannon's order, to temporarily halt the criminal investigation and, I guess, appointing the special master. One analyst after another meticulously detailed the failings of Cannon's reasoning. It was untethered to the law, a political conclusion in search of a legal rationale, deeply problematic, laughably bad. At some point, one truly runs out of euphemisms for lawless partisan hackery. Okay, all great. Let's see. At this point, they haven't got a ruling from the 11th Circuit when they wrote this. Down at the bottom of the next paragraph, it says, for all we know, the Trump-stacked 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals or 5 radical justices on the Supreme Court may also greet her outrageous decision with a standing ovation, as Republicans did elsewhere. So the problem is not just the extreme and heinous flaws in Cannon's ruling, it's also the Trump-shaped world in which Cannon operates with impunity, which we will all have to endure for the foreseeable future. It's the brutal reality that we may face a steady stream of depraved decisions like Cannon's for the rest of our lives, and the pain of hearing from every quarter that nothing can be done to remedy it. Now, I guess I'm sure that they were pleasantly surprised later by the 11th Circuit ruling, but as we pointed out yesterday, just speculation, but it is entirely possible. Of course, you come up with a different panel. Get crazier Trump judges next time, or just get the same ones who then basically are motivated by saying, well, we gave a win to the anti-Trump forces last time so that we could feel better about giving a win to the pro-Trump forces this time. Anyway, what are they talking about doing here? Does it say? Yeah, I mean, it may just be that what they're talking about is court reform in general. I guess that's a possibility. And maybe we ought to remind everybody of what those principles are, since we're coming up to the break anyway. So what are they proposing here? We watched the same pattern play out at the end of this last Supreme Court term. One case after another blew up decades of existing precedent and tests and doctrine and replaced them with Rorschach exams that transformed contemporary Republican policies into constitutional law. Smart lawyers dutifully digested those opinions and are set to work figuring out just how the EPA or public school districts or state legislatures that want to stop mass shootings can plausibly work around these new tests. And of course, we were living in a rational regime in which the rule of law governed. If we were living that way anyway, that would make perfect sense. But if the last term at the Supreme Court, and indeed Cannon's baffling new order, new back in September, mean anything, they signify that in this new age of Calvin ball, one side invents new rules, and then the other scrambles to try to play by them. For every single legal thinker who read the Mar-a-Lago order to mean, quite correctly, that ex-presidents are above the law, furrowing your brow and pointing out its grievous errors only take you halfway there. The better the question is, what, if anything, do you propose to do about it? The furrowing is cathartic, but it's also not a plan. If there were a principle that best embodies why progressives are losing ground so quickly, even as they are correct on the facts and the law and the zeitgeist, it must be this tendency to just keep on lawyering the other side's bad law in the hope that the lawyering itself will make all the bad faith and crooked law go away. But for those who are genuinely worried that democracy will rise or fall based on whether a case lands before their judges or others, merely explaining legal flaws in pointillist detail isn't an answer. I don't want to miss my cue here, but I already have, so we're about 5 seconds behind. And soberly explaining that Cannon was wrong about most stuff, but correct about two things, is decidedly not an answer either. You do not, under any circumstances, have to hand it to them. Right, okay. Well, it's not a standalone answer to point out that Cannon was a Trump pick, a member of the extremely not neutral Federalist Society, seated after Trump lost the election, right? So what? On that count.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We came in a little bit late because we left a little bit late. So, I don't know, somehow that balances out. So I was scanning over the rest of this article, and basically, yes, what it comes down to is they say, well, the thing to do is expand the courts, not only the Supreme Court, but perhaps the circuit courts as well. Interesting here is a point here which, remember, this is prior to the 11th Circuit reversing Cannon. We just have Cannon's bad rulings here to complain about. And the suggestion here is letting Joe Biden balance out far-right courts like the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which will weigh Cannon's ruling if the government appeals, would go a long way to tame the jurisprudence of Trumpism. It might. That's true. But now keep this in mind. Now that we know what the 11th Circuit did, it's entirely possible, and in keeping with what we learned in history classes in high school or what have you, about the FDR, what they ended up calling court packing, right, episode, in which we learned that the threat that the president might follow through on this and the Congress might enable him to add new members to the Supreme Court, to change the size of the Supreme Court and make new nominations, got the then current Supreme Court to recognize that if they changed the way they approached some of these New Deal cases, they might tamp down on the fervor for expansion of the court. And they went ahead and did that, and it's taught as history that they essentially put out the fire for Supreme Court reform by reforming the way they handled the cases. And, you might say, well, substantively, the outcomes are pretty much the same. They wanted to assign new judges so that they could get these kinds of results from the Supreme Court, but they didn't have to because they started getting the results that they wanted. So, that was enough to satisfy them. So in that light, you should perhaps consider whether or not the 11th Circuit ran the same play here. If we uphold this bizarre Cannon decision, won't that motivate Democrats who are already in Congress and the Democratic president and perhaps whatever majority they might be able to build for themselves or expand on in the Senate? The House would present a problem, but perhaps they can reverse things. And indeed, the horrible rulings on abortion issues and others might drive exactly that kind of turnover. But doesn't it, if we don't do something about Cannon, do we face the same threat? Expansion of the 11th Circuit such that it would go a long way to tame the jurisprudence of Trumpism. If we want the jurisprudence of Trumpism, we may have to give ground on the jurisprudence of Trumpism here temporarily in exchange for being allowed to keep the 11th Circuit Trumpy. So did they decide to do that, or did they come to it from some other direction? We don't know. Can't really tell. But given that we are instructed in high school that it is fact that this happened at one point on the Supreme Court level, it shouldn't be too difficult. And in fact, it should be, I guess, the default analysis of what happened at the 11th Circuit. So anyway, they go on to say in this article here, this is from last September, there are other worthy ideas too, among them, I guess, term limits for justices and lower court judges, limits on courts' jurisdiction to strike down democratically enacted laws, that'd be a pretty big one, modest reforms that restrict the Supreme Court's ability to suppress voting rights before an election. Let's hear them all. God knows Biden's Court Reform Commission studied them extensively, to little end. But the chorus from the left, the middle, and the sane right, that the lawlessness is lawless, only affirms that we cannot ever escape this closed loop of Trump's judges. Being really mad, but doing nothing to change things, is a terrible strategy for democracy and for public confidence in the courts. It creates the illusion that if we work really hard to debunk corrupt rulings, we can force Trump judges to see the light or feel shame or do something different. Meanwhile, the targets of our meticulous takedowns laugh at the pains we take to prove them wrong. They do not care. Well, in light of the 11th Circuit ruling in favor of reversing Cannon, do we think they care? Do we think they care for the wrong reasons? Is that okay? Maybe. That could be enough. I think that probably they're probably correct in assuming on the 11th Circuit that a lot of what was written here, well, they're probably correct in assuming that it wouldn't go anywhere. But if they thought it might, that their ruling reversing Cannon would diffuse a lot of these calls. They shouldn't, but they probably did. So they conclude here, we get it. Lawyers are trained to lawyer, but if you are lawyering within a system you believe to be broken or immoral or lawless, and you aren't standing up with meaningful fixes for that system, you are fundamentally acceding to that lawlessness. It is a moral victory to point out the errors, but it's also a tacit concession that the system is in fact legitimate no matter how low it may go. Every one of us is going to need to decide how long we can continue to operate that way. There are too many things wrong with the Cannon order to litigate, and there are too many things wrong with Trump's judicial dominion of every part of our lives for years to come to litigate. So maybe it's time to stop litigating them and start fixing them. But haven't seen much progress on that since September 6th, 2022, when this call went out. But that's just because, as influential as they are, they don't dictate policy to anyone. And when was the Senate going to consider this? One, the House was never going to take it up. Two, even if the Senate wanted to consider it, they're stuck on military nominations and can't take up anything like this and would have a hell of a time getting it through, only to see it die in the House anyway. So there's that. Okay. Now I think we'll turn here, at least for the moment, to Evan Corrin's latest contribution, lending us his personal knowledge of the classification system and the handling of confidential and classified documents. His Snapshot with Evan and Julie Substack includes this piece with Evan's name on it. I don't know whether Julie is written on this topic or not, but here we go. Trump indicted, primary source resources and initial analysis from a national security classification professional. Always interesting. Former President Donald Trump, of course, was indicted Thursday for willfully retaining national defense information and additional crimes related to the cover-up of that retention. Here on Snapshot, we have been providing analysis grounded in my 19 years of experience working on national security classification, declassification, controlled unclassified information, and presidential records at the National Security Council and National Archives and Records Administration. This was an immensely avoidable indictment. If former President Trump had returned the classified documents when initially requested to do so, he would not have been indicted for these crimes. There is such a long history of former senior officials accidentally taking classified documents that the Information Security Oversight Office, or ISOO, where I worked for 11 years, not me, but Evan, set up a process to retrieve classified records outside of government control. That is the process that President Biden and former Vice President Pence followed. ISOO is the office within the National Archives that oversees classification, declassification, and controlled unclassified information for the entire executive branch. The indictment of former President Trump demonstrates that there was nothing accidental about Trump taking these classified documents or retaining them. I've lost my spot here because I had to get rid of the pop-up that was getting in the way, the continue reading one. The indictment, of course, lays out in detail the multi-day effort that Trump and his valet, Walt Nauta, took to move these documents to avoid returning them after Trump received a subpoena to turn over these documents. By the way, I should go back and look. Nauta, or however he pronounces his last name, his first name being Walt, as I recall, it's Walt is not short for Walter. It's actually short for Waltine. I thought that was interesting. Like saltine, but with a W. You know, I don't know where that comes from. That's a new one. I mean, I've never seen Waltine before, but maybe I'm out of it. What can I tell you? But I thought that was interesting. In case you ever see it and you think it's a typo, I guess that's not. Waltine Nauta. Well, anyway, Evan says, I'll be writing a lot about this and the classification and presidential records aspects of this court case in the future. But for now, I wanted to let you know that we are taking the paywall down temporarily on our past articles related to this court case to allow those who are interested to read and share them. That's nice. In addition, as a service to our readers, below is a collection of primary source material relevant to this court case. And at the moment, all we've got is this list and then, of course, the wacky picture of Trump's boxes in the bathroom and shower at Mar-a-Lago. But if you're interested, let me run down some of the titles, and maybe we want to read one or two. I'm not really sure, but give you some idea of, and I'll give you the link, of course, to Evan's, this initial article, and then it has this bulleted list of past snapshot articles on classification and declassification in context, its starting points, the national security classification markings, the thought behind it. News sparks a novel to recommend. Oh, I wonder what that was. National security classified information discovered outside government control. Can't believe that happened. The continued discovery of national security classified information outside of government control and how you declassify a document. Presidential edition. In other words, can you mentally declassify documents as president or not? Other primary source resources for reading about this, good backgrounders, the indictment of Trump and Nauta, the statement from Special Counsel Jack Smith, Executive Order 13526, which is the executive branch policy governing national security classification and declassification, National Archives' response to press inquiries about the case and the Presidential Records Act itself, in case some loser keeps citing it to you as defense. 18 U.S. Code Section 793E, the law prohibiting the willful retention of national defense information, and the other laws that Trump and Nauda are charged with regarding covering up the willful retention of national defense information. The statute on the conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding a document or record, corruptly concealing a document or record, concealing a document in a federal investigation, a scheme to conceal, and false statements and representations. And then finally, the Classified Information Procedures Act, or CIPA, that we cited before, which is the law governing the use, handling, and storage of classified information in court cases. So there you go. Just wanted to let you know that there was good background information out there. So when your questions arise, we'll be turning to this probably list of primary source information for our answers. Okay. I thought there was going to be a little bit more analysis to that piece, but I'm sure that is in the offing and coming soon and may already be up, but I'll have to go and take, well, you know what? Let me click through to the, can't I click through to the, landing page of Snapshot and see what's going on here? What's the latest? That's it in terms of, I guess that's the latest post. Okay. So we're up to speed and up to date. There you go. Now you know we got a good place to do some background reading over the coming weekend. Let's see. Other things I wanted to share with you. I mentioned before that more interest in the golf thing than I thought was going to be the case. USA Today reporting, thanks to Steve Gardner at that publication, that the U.S. Senate has opened an investigation into the PGA Tour LIV golf deal. I have to believe they probably mean for that to be read aloud as like live golf. Like we all live and breathe golf. I don't know. I haven't watched any, so I haven't heard the commentators speaking it aloud. But anyway, the PGA Tour and Live Golf may have already finalized the terms of their planned merger, but it won't take place without a closer look from Capitol Hill. Who would have thunk it, right? Senator Richard Blumenthal, Connecticut. So pay attention there, Greg. Chairman of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, said Monday the deal raises concerns about the Saudi government's role in influencing this effort and the risks posed by a foreign government entity assuming control over a cherished American institution. It doesn't immediately present itself as a huge problem, cherished as the institution may be, right? But who cares who runs golf tournaments, right? Well, let's find out. Blumenthal sent letters to both the PGA Tour and Live Golf seeking records and emails about how the deal was reached and how the newly formed entity will be structured and operated. Is Greg Norman out is one question addressed in another USA Today article. Apparently he, though the public face of Live Golf for the past couple months or years, however long it's existed, he could see his influence curtailed as a part of restructuring. Both parties have tried to avoid characterizing the deal as a merger. Why? Because I think, of course, of the PGA's non-profit status. How do you merge a for-profit investment company with a non-profit? And the non-profit is what protects it from, I think, antitrust suits in other instances. But they say the PGA Tour will retain somehow its nonprofit status, and the joint commercial entity would exist as a secondary asset. I don't know if that's going to pass muster, all right? However, Live Golf and several golfers sued the PGA Tour last year for alleged antitrust violations, calling it a monopoly throughout their 118-page complaint. So now, of course, they say, now that we're merging, this monopoly and antitrust violation is a great thing, and we want to keep it around. Last year we were suing, saying it was horrible, and that as a matter of law it had to be destroyed. Now we've bought it, so it should be preserved. By combining forces, the PGA... Oh, yes, I missed this part here because this is important. The U.S. Department of Justice has also been looking into the possible anti-competitive practices of the PGA Tour after the tour tried to punish some of its players for joining Live or LIV, or whatever the hell we are supposed to call it. That's of some interest. Now, of course, I'm more worried about the possibility of players who remained loyal to the PGA being punished by either LIV Golf or the government of Saudi Arabia, for all we know. By combining forces, the PGA Tour and LIV Golf could become an even bigger target for antitrust regulators who could potentially try to block or delay the deal. That's possible. Citing Saudi Arabia's, quote, deeply disturbing human rights record at home and abroad, Blumenthal said in his letter to PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan, the tour's sudden and drastic reversal of position concerning LIV Golf raised serious questions regarding the reasons for and terms behind the announced agreement. I mean, yeah, it does. I don't know that they're going to find anything there. I don't know if it goes in this direction. But I mean, I guess at the outset, you have to at least consider, how is it that the PGA Tour spent so much time saying, absolutely not, these people are the worst, they have a terrible human rights record, we shouldn't be doing any business with them at all, it's an awful idea, they shouldn't be allowed to compete in the same space with us, and then all of a sudden, we're partners, they're great, can't wait. And we're going to keep our nonprofit status somehow. I don't know how. Now, keeping in mind that some people in their criticism of LIV Golf and the Saudi-ish regime, would bring up things like, hey, they murdered Jamal Khashoggi and chopped up his body and disposed of him. That's bad. They're headed by Mr. Bonesaw, who might do the same to you. Ordinarily, in a situation where somebody says, these people are terrible, we don't want anything to do with them, they are human rights violators, they have all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues, they're trying to muscle their way in here, then they want to sports wash their terrible human rights records, we want nothing to do with them. And 5 minutes passes and they come back out and they say, change my mind, they're awesome, and we're selling a controlling interest in our, group to them. That's what we're doing. You would say, at some point, did the people from LIV Golf just tell them something? Oh, don't worry, we want to reassure you of our good intentions. Or did they say, we'll chop you up too? And then they said, you know what? A merger would be a great idea. Seems like something that would only happen in the movies. But is it? And even if that didn't happen, even if it's much more grounded, much more practical and economically based than that, which is what everybody is thinking, I still have questions about what happens to individual players who were particularly loyal to the PGA and then therefore particularly critical of Saudi Arabia and the government of Saudi Arabia, the way they do business, what have you. A lot of the aim of this merger is to bring these golf events to the Middle East, where they've, used their oil money to build lush green golf courses in the middle of the Sahara Desert, or the Arabian Desert, I guess. And they want to have events there, and they'll offer lots of money to have events there. And are people who are looking to say, I was just being loyal to the tour that's been good to me, but now they say they've made peace with LIV Golf, I will too. I'm going to go and play in one of these events. And then they never emerge from the clubhouse. What do we say about that possibility? Probably not. I presume it would be bad for business if the name brand golfers who draw fans and spending and whatever else it is that makes people think that they're going to get a return on investment for buying a golf tour, a professional golf tour. If those people are chopped up and killed, they probably make less money. So maybe that's enough to control things. Or maybe it's enough that they say, well, you'll go out and offer your apologies about this and say you overstated the case, or you'll keep quiet from now on, or else what? Well, on the one hand, or else we might chop you up, but on another hand, we now control pretty much all the major professional golf tours that there are where you could make some money. And so if you would like to continue your livelihood, you should be quiet. And that, I guess, will be the end of professional golf's criticism of the Saudi regime, even though they're still doing the same, they would still be doing the same things that they were criticizing them for before this whole thing started. It's an important thing to keep in mind, I guess, even though we don't really want to occupy any more of our time, probably, with thinking about golf. If you want to play, that's one thing. Thinking about the politics of it, that seems to defeat the purpose. Okay, let's see. Other stories to share with you. I don't know exactly what it was that motivated me to grab this one, but another Substack article, this time from Unpopular Front by John Gans, about whom I am not certain I know anything, but another, I guess, eulogy to Silvio Berlusconi, which intrigued me at the moment, though I've lost any notes that I might have had on why it was so interesting. But I think it was, that he was saying the parallels between Berlusconi and Trump are obvious, but there are some observations that ought to be brought to the fore about the two of them that deserve some discussion. Ciao Silvio is the name of the piece. The Age of Bunga by John Gans. You remember Bunga? Wasn't it when he was caught in one or another of the sex scandals that I was going to say plagued him, but it really didn't bother him that much. Plagued him in his career, where he basically had referred to, well, why is everybody bothering me about having sex or doing the bunga bunga or whatever the hell, that some bunga bunga was normal for us. I don't know. That was the terminology for it. Okay, the Age of Bunga. My first reaction, John says, to the death of Silvio Berlusconi was to make a joke. There was never quite any way to take him seriously. Something about his vulgarity, his clownishness, and the cheerful shamelessness of his corruption made one inclined to laugh. In his later years, with the apparent assistance of plastic surgery and Botox, the sleazy smile became fixed into a permanent rictus. Do I have that right? The entire massive head looked like one of those rubber parody masks of politicians. It does in this photo that accompanies the piece. During a recent election, when he showed up to a polling place, a man was caught on camera asking a friend, sotto voce, is that really him or is it a mask? It was a good question. Berlusconi invited you to laugh with him or at him. It didn't matter as long as you were having fun, to enjoy the spectacle in all its obscenity. It was central to his success and apparently supernatural ability to dodge convictions and survive politically. He could appear harmless, charming, not worth getting so worked up about. His whole thing, he said, relax, and then maybe put his hand where you didn't particularly want it. And once you stop to reflect, all appears a little less funny. When you add up all these shambolic cabinets, Berlusconi was unified Italy's longest ruling leader after Mussolini and Giovanni Giolitti, a name with which I'm less familiar, admittedly. There is an argument to be made that, as fellow creator of modern Italy, he also comes in third just behind them. It feels perverse to use the word statesman, but he was the ultimate pervert statesman. Instead of building the foundation of national unity and strength, he ably and consistently undermined it. The entire trajectory of post-Cold War Italy is defined by his politics. Yet another funny thing, this subject of 35 criminal investigations was elected on a wave of anti-corruption sentiment. In 1992, it was revealed that essentially the entire Italian political system was on the take. Dubbed Tangentopoli, roughly Bribesville, the ensuing scandal resulted in such a profound shakeup of the system that it's customary to speak of a second Italian republic forming in its wake. About a third of the deputies in parliament ended up under investigation. Bettino Craxi, I hope I have that, Craxi, how do you say that in Italian? The former socialist prime minister fled the country. Electoral support for the five-party coalition that spanned center-left and center-right, with the socialists and Christian Democrats as its major pillars, collapsed. At first, it seemed like the successor to the communists, the Democratic Party of the left, would reap the whirlwind and become the go-to protest vote against the corrupt system. Enter media mogul Silvio Berlusconi. Somehow, his close association with Craxi, which had allowed him to consolidate his media empire, didn't matter. He built a political movement through directly owning the press and TV stations and employed a postmodern form of red baiting. Yes, the corruption was bad, but the prosecutions were also a part of a communist plot to take over the government. Still, Berlusconi could not do it without allies, and what allies he chose, the entire basis of Italian political culture since the war, was that all the major parties had an anti-fascist pedigree. Movimento Sociale Italiano, the party formed by the former Mussolini acolytes, skulked in the margins for a generation. But being outside the system, they were also outside of the bribery and corruption and presented themselves now as a party of good government. Berlusconi included MSI in his new Forza Italia coalition. As David Broder writes in his recent book, Mussolini's grandchildren, oh boy, and we're way late on this one, and no point in spending any more time talking about what David Broder has to say, I think. But the upshot of this, since we're now out of time and way past our outro, is that Berlusconi, I guess, invents the play of calling out government corruption and saying that the only people who can correct the government corruption is get rid of the insiders and bring in the outsiders. And it just so happens that the outsiders chosen by both Berlusconi and Trump, to make that parallel, is the fascist outsiders, the people who've been excluded from reasonable, normal society and, of course, governance because, they're fascists, and everybody knows that fascism is bad. They've somehow opened the door not only for fascists to re-enter government as respected members, well, not respected by us, but somebody. They get themselves elected to these jobs, right? But that it's no longer necessary to exclude fascists from polite society. After all, polite society has produced nothing but corruption and bribery. And these guys haven't been a part of that, except, of course, it's part of their governing ideology that they don't care what they do and no one can stop them from doing anything. So they're more likely to be corrupt and on the take once they gain power than anybody. But never mind all of that. And that's the parallel that really matters between these two. Interesting.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time to finally get out of Justice Putnam's way so he can bring you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see. Hillary Clinton called the GOP efforts to defend Trump profoundly disturbing. And now, news from Tennessee. A teacher group sued over a Tennessee law that bans the deduction of members' dues from their paychecks. The old right-to-work play.